The afternoon sun hung low in the sky as a quiet breeze passed through the streets of the small suburban neighborhood. The sound of sneakers scraping the sidewalk mixed with the soft hum of passing cars. A 17-year-old boy named Jaden walked home from basketball practice, his backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds in, lost in the rhythm of a song he had played too many times. His mind wasn't on anything serious, mostly on what leftovers might be waiting for him at home and whether his mother would be back from work early. Jaden was a good kid. He kept to himself, stayed focused on school, and looked forward to college basketball. The neighborhood wasn't exactly dangerous, but he had been taught early that staying aware mattered. His mother worked in law enforcement, so those lessons came naturally. Always be respectful, she'd said. Always keep your hands visible. He'd rolled his eyes when she said it, thinking she was being overly cautious. But deep down he understood. As he walked past a row of parked cars, a police cruiser slowed behind him. He didn't notice at first. He was texting a friend, laughing at a joke, completely unaware of the two officers exchanging glances inside the car. One of them pointed toward Jaden, saying he matched the description of a suspect from a nearby car theft call. The other nodded, and the cruiser came to a quiet stop a few yards away. The voice that broke Jaden's calm came sharp and firm. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" he heard from behind him. He turned, pulling out one earbud, confused. "Me?" he asked, pointing to himself. The officer stepped out of the car, one hand resting on his belt. "Yeah, you. What are you doing around here?" Jaden blinked. "Just walking home, sir. From practice." He lifted the strap of his bag slightly, showing the edge of a basketball inside. But the officer didn't seem satisfied. The second one joined, circling around the car, his eyes narrow and serious. "Where exactly you coming from?" he asked. "And what's in the bag?" Jaden shifted his weight, trying not to sound defensive. "Basketball gear. You can check if you want." He held the bag out slightly, but the officer raised a hand. "Don't reach into it," he barked. The shout made Jaden freeze. His heart skipped. He slowly lowered the bag to the ground and lifted both hands, palms up. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm not doing anything." The neighborhood felt heavier suddenly. Curtains moved. A door creaked open. A few people had come to their windows, sensing trouble. Jaden swallowed hard. He had seen videos like this online, videos that never ended well. But this was real, and it was happening to him. "ID," one officer demanded. "Where's your ID?" Jaden pointed to his back pocket. "It's right here." "Can I—" Before he could finish, the officer took a step closer. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Jaden's chest tightened. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. His voice came out small. "Sir, I just want to get my ID." The officer's partner looked uneasy. "Maybe he's telling the truth," he said quietly. But the first officer shook his head. "We'll see about that." He spoke into his radio, calling for backup. The faint crackle of static answered him. Jaden's stomach turned. Backup for what? He hadn't done anything. One of the neighbors started recording with her phone. The sound of a car door closing echoed from across the street. Jaden wanted to disappear, to blink and find himself at home, safe, but he couldn't move. He kept his hands up, trying to remember everything his mother had ever told him about staying calm. The longer it went on, the worse it felt. Every second stretched like an hour. The officer asked more questions, some that didn't even make sense. "Why are you walking here instead of driving?" "Where's your car?" "Who do you know in this area?" Each question came with suspicion, like he had already done something wrong. Jaden tried to keep his voice steady. "Sir, I live a few blocks away." "You can call my mom." "She works for—" He stopped himself, remembering that his mother didn't like people knowing where she worked. "She's in law enforcement," he finished softly. That didn't seem to help. "Oh, really?" the officer said, raising an eyebrow. "You expect us to believe that?" He smirked slightly, like he'd caught him in a lie. "What's her name, then?" Jaden hesitated. "Agent Carter," he said finally. The words sounded small, almost lost under the hum of the police radio. The officer wrote something down in his notebook but didn't respond. Instead, he ordered Jaden to turn around. "Face the car," he said. "Hands on the hood." Jaden's heart raced. "Am I under arrest?" he asked quietly. The officer didn't answer. "Hands on the hood." Jaden obeyed. The cold metal touched his palms, and for the first time, fear fully took over. He looked down at his reflection in the car's surface and tried not to cry. He hadn't done anything wrong, but that didn't seem to matter. The sound of sirens approached in the distance. Another police car arrived, lights flashing. 2 more officers stepped out, talking to the first pair. Jaden couldn't hear everything, but he caught fragments. Stolen car. Matches the description. Suspicious behavior. His throat tightened. His backpack lay on the ground beside the curb, the basketball peeking out. One of the new officers bent down, opened the bag, and shook his head. "Just sports stuff," he said. But even that didn't stop the others from keeping him pinned in place. "We're still checking," the first officer said. Minutes passed. Jaden's arms began to ache, but he didn't move. He could feel every gaze from the growing crowd. A few people whispered, others filmed. He wanted to shout that he was innocent, that this was a mistake, but something told him that speaking too loudly could make things worse. He remembered his mother's words again. "Always keep your cool. Don't argue. Don't make sudden moves." So he stayed quiet. Inside, though, his thoughts were racing. What if they didn't believe him? What if something went wrong? What if his mom found out too late? At the same moment, across town, his mother was finishing paperwork at her FBI office. She looked at the clock later than she expected. She sent Jaden a quick text. "You home yet?" It didn't deliver. She frowned, assuming his phone had died after practice. She didn't know that just miles away, her son was standing against a police car, too afraid to move. Back on the street, one officer spoke into his radio again. "Dispatch confirmed the description. Black male, mid to late teens, gray hoodie, black pants." The other officer nodded toward Jaden. "That's him, right?" "Wrong." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. "Suspect was wearing a red jacket and had a tattoo on his right hand." There was a pause. The officers exchanged awkward glances. Jaden turned slightly, hearing the words. Hope flickered, but he didn't say anything. He waited, heart pounding. The first officer cleared his throat. "We'll, double check." Still, they didn't tell him to move. He stood there, feeling small and powerless. The weight of every assumption pressed down on him. A few neighbors called out from porches. One woman yelled, "He didn't do anything!" Another shouted, "That's the Carter boy!" The officers didn't respond. Finally, one officer sighed. "All right," he said, more to his partner than to Jaden. "Maybe we should let him go." The words brought relief, but only for a moment. Before anyone could act, another voice came from behind them, a deep, commanding tone that made everyone turn. "What's going on here?" It was the police sergeant arriving to assess the scene. The first officer quickly explained his version, skipping details, emphasizing suspicion. The sergeant listened, his eyes moving from the officer to Jaden, then to the growing crowd. Something in his expression softened. "You found anything illegal?" he asked. "No, sir," the officer admitted. But he matched the description. The sergeant frowned. "Doesn't look like a match to me." Then, turning to Jaden, he said quietly, "You can put your hands down." "Son." Jaden lowered his arm slowly, the blood rushing back into his fingers. He wanted to leave, to run home and forget everything, but he stayed still, waiting for permission. "You're free to go," the sergeant said finally. "Sorry for the inconvenience." The words felt empty. They didn't fix what had just happened. Jaden bent to pick up his bag. His hands shook as he slung it over his shoulder. "Can I go now?" he asked softly. "Yes," the sergeant said, nodding. The other officers avoided his eyes. As Jaden walked away, the world felt different. Every step felt heavier than the last. He didn't look back at the flashing lights or the group of officers still standing by the car. He just wanted to get home. He didn't know that only minutes later his mother's car would be racing down that same street, her badge ready in her hand, her heart pounding with fear and fury. For now, Jaden just wanted to reach his front door, step inside, and breathe again. But the fear he felt that evening would stay with him long after the streetlights came on. Jaden's legs felt weak by the time he turned the corner onto his street. The sun had started to dip behind the houses, throwing long shadows across the road. He walked faster, wanting nothing more than to reach the safety of home. His hands still trembled a little, and even though the air was warm, he couldn't shake the chill that clung to him. The flashing lights, the shouting, the fear, they all replayed in his head over and over again. He reached the front door and stood still for a second before unlocking it. Inside, the house was quiet. The faint ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound. His mother wasn't home yet. She usually got back around 7, but sometimes her work kept her longer. Jaden dropped his bag on the couch and sank down beside it, rubbing his hands together. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but it didn't help much. He picked up his phone and saw a few missed calls from his mother. His heart skipped. He hadn't even noticed it buzzing earlier. He texted back quickly, "I'm home." Then he added, "Everything's fine." He didn't want her to worry, though he knew she probably would anyway. He stood up and went to the kitchen for some water. The glass shook slightly in his hand. He hated that his body was reacting like this, like it didn't trust him to calm down. He told himself he was okay, that it was over. But every sound outside, a car door closing, someone's dog barking, made him flinch. He sat at the table and stared out the window. The street looked normal again. Kids on bikes, a couple walking their dog, a delivery truck pulling up across the road. Everything was the same, but it didn't feel the same to him anymore. He wondered how fast something so ordinary could turn so dangerous. He hadn't even done anything wrong. Just walking home had been enough. When his mother finally pulled into the driveway, Jaden jumped to his feet. He could tell by the sound of the tires that she was driving faster than usual. She stepped inside a few seconds later, her face tight with concern. "Jaden?" she called. "You okay?" He nodded, though his eyes gave him away. She dropped her bag on the table and walked straight to him. "What happened?" she asked. "I saw a video online. Someone said there was a police stop in this neighborhood." Her voice was calm but sharp, like she was forcing herself to stay in control. Jaden tried to smile, but it came out shaky. "It was me," he said quietly. "They stopped me, said I matched some description. I didn't do anything." For a moment she didn't say a word. Then she stepped closer, checking him over as if to make sure he wasn't hurt. "Did they touch you?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "No, but they made me put my hands on the car. They called for backup. I thought—" He stopped. He didn't want to finish that sentence. His mother exhaled slowly and pulled him into a hug. "You did everything right," she said. "You stayed calm. I'm proud of you for that." Her voice trembled slightly now. She pulled back and looked at him. "But they had no right to treat you that way." Jaden shrugged, staring at the floor. "They thought I was someone else." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes narrowed, the calm mask she wore beginning to crack. "No," she said finally. "They saw a young black man walking alone and decided you looked suspicious." "That's not a mistake, Jaden. That's bias." He didn't want to argue. He knew she was right, but he didn't want to relive it again. "It's over now," he murmured. "I just want to forget about it," she sighed, pacing slowly across the kitchen. "I know you do, but things like this can't just be forgotten. They have to be addressed. People need to be held accountable." She stopped and turned to him. "Did they tell you their names?" He shook his head. "No, they just told me to face the car. The sergeant showed up later and let me go." She nodded once, her jaw tightening. "All right, we'll handle this properly." He didn't know what that meant exactly, but he could tell by her tone that she wasn't going to let it slide. She pulled out her phone and made a call. Jaden couldn't hear the whole conversation, but he caught pieces of it. References to the local precinct, to a supervisor, to body camera footage. Her voice was calm but firm, professional, the way she always sounded when she was in control. After the call, she sat down beside him. "I know you don't want to talk about it, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened, start to finish," she said gently. Jaden took a deep breath. "I was just walking home. The police car pulled up behind me. They said I looked like someone who stole a car. I told them I was coming from practice, but they didn't listen. One of them kept yelling, the other one called for backup. Then they made me put my hands on the car." His voice faltered. Everyone was watching. His mother reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did everything right," she said again. "You didn't give them a reason to escalate it." Jaden frowned. "Doesn't matter. They didn't need a reason." That sentence hung heavy between them. His mother didn't answer. She just sat there, her eyes fixed on some point far away, as if she was already planning what to do next. Later that night after dinner, she went to her office upstairs. Jaden could hear her typing on her computer, hear the steady rhythm of her fingers on the keyboard. He sat in the living room watching TV without really seeing it. Every so often he'd glance toward the stairs, wondering what she was doing. When she came back down, she looked calmer, more focused. "I filed a report," she said simply. Tomorrow I'll speak directly to the department chief. This won't be ignored. Jaden shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do, she replied firmly. If I let this go, it tells them it's okay. And it's not okay. He sighed. But what if it makes things worse? She shook her head. The only way things get worse is if people stay silent. He didn't say anything after that. He just nodded, even though part of him wished she would just drop it. He wanted to move on. He didn't want everyone at school whispering about it. But deep down, he knew she was right. She always was. The next morning, she left early. Jaden watched from the window as her car disappeared down the street. He had a strange feeling in his stomach, a mix of pride and fear. He knew his mom wasn't just any woman. She was strong, determined, and she didn't back down from anything. But still, this was personal. This time it was about him. At school, everyone seemed to know. By lunch, he had already heard a dozen versions of the story. Some kids came up to him, saying they'd seen the video online. Man, that was crazy, one of them said. I can't believe that was you. Jaden forced a small smile, but it felt wrong. He didn't want to be the center of attention. When he got home, his mom wasn't there yet. He sat on the porch waiting. It was almost sunset when her car finally pulled up. She got out looking tired but steady. I spoke with the chief, she said, walking up to him. He was surprised, to say the least. Jaden tilted his head. Surprised? She nodded. They didn't know the person they stopped was my son. I made sure they know now. He looked at her, uncertain. What did he say? He said they'll investigate, she replied. But I'm not waiting for an apology. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. Jaden thought about that for a moment. Do you think it will change anything? His mother looked at him, her eyes softening. Maybe not right away, but every step matters. Even small ones. He nodded slowly. She smiled faintly and placed a hand on his shoulder. You're stronger than you think, she said. You handled yourself with courage. I need you to remember that. That night, as Jaden lay in bed, he replayed her words in his mind. The fear from yesterday hadn't completely faded, but something else had started to grow in its place, a quiet determination. Maybe he couldn't change the world overnight, but he could start by not letting fear control him. He didn't know it yet, but his mother's complaint would soon cause a stir at the department. People would start asking questions. Meetings would be held. The officers involved would be called in for review. Some would defend their actions. Others would stay silent, but the story wouldn't disappear, not this time. And as for Jaden, he would carry that day with him, not as a scar, but as a reminder. A reminder of what his mother stood for, and what he wanted to stand for too. The next morning felt heavy. Jaden woke up earlier than usual, the memory of the last 2 days still sitting in his chest. The light from his window spilled across the room, but it didn't bring much comfort. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and stared at his basketball shoes near the bed. Normally he'd feel excited about practice, but today, the thought of walking outside again made his stomach twist. He wasn't scared exactly, but he felt different now, more alert, less trusting. Downstairs, the smell of coffee filled the kitchen. His mother was already dressed in her work clothes, standing by the counter reading something on her phone. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were tired. She glanced up when Jaden walked in. Morning, she said softly. Morning, he replied, grabbing a bowl for cereal. There was silence between them for a while, the kind that's too full to be comfortable. Finally, she spoke. I have a meeting at the police department again today. I need to follow up on what happened. Jaden didn't look up. Do you really have to? She sighed. Yes, I know it's uncomfortable, but this is the right thing to do. He didn't argue. He knew she wasn't going to let it go, and deep down, he respected that. Still, part of him wished she would just let it fade away. He didn't want more attention. He didn't want people whispering his name like he was some kind of victim. He just wanted things to go back to how they were before that patrol car stopped him. After breakfast, he helped her carry a few files to her car. She paused before getting in. You'll be okay here for a while? She asked. He nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. She gave him a small smile. I'll call you when I'm done. Then she drove off, leaving a faint trail of dust on the quiet street. Inside the department building, the atmosphere was tense. People knew why she was there. Some greeted her politely, others avoided eye contact. She was respected in her field, but she also had a reputation for not backing down. She didn't care about small talk. She was there for one reason: She met with the chief in a small glass-walled office overlooking the city. He looked uneasy, flipping through the file she'd brought. "Agent Carter," he began. "I want to start by saying we take this very seriously." She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I appreciate that. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here for accountability." He cleared his throat. "Of course. We've reviewed some of the body cam footage already. There were discrepancies." "Discrepancies?" she repeated, her voice calm but sharp. "You mean my son was stopped without cause?" He hesitated, then said, "It appears the officers acted on an incorrect match from a nearby call. They should have verified the description before escalating." Her jaw tightened. "And what happens to them now?" He leaned back. "An internal review is underway. We'll handle it appropriately." She looked him straight in the eyes. "I want a copy of that report when it's finished." "Of course," he said quickly. "You'll be updated." When she left the office, her face was unreadable. But inside, she was boiling. She'd seen this kind of thing before. Words like review and protocol used to smooth things over to keep the system from admitting how broken it was. But this time, it wasn't just another case file. It was her son. Back home, Jaden sat in the living room scrolling through his phone. His story had spread farther than he expected. Local news outlets had picked it up, and the video was now all over social media. Most comments were supportive, but a few were cruel, full of doubt and blame. He stopped reading after a while. It was too much. The sound of the front door opening made him jump slightly. His mother walked in, setting her bag on the table. "You talked to them?" he asked. "I did," she said, taking off her blazer. "They're reviewing it." He frowned. "So that's it?" "For now," she replied. "But I'm not done." He studied her face, noticing how tired she looked. "You should rest," he said. She smiled faintly. "I will after I make a few more calls." That evening, she sat at her desk with a notepad full of names and numbers. She was contacting advocacy groups, journalists, and legal advisors she trusted. If the department tried to bury this, she was ready to bring it to light. She wasn't after revenge, she wanted change. Not just for Jaden, but for every kid who'd been stopped, questioned, or scared for no reason at all. Jaden walked in quietly and leaned against the doorway. "You're really going all in, huh?" he said. She turned her chair toward him. "Wouldn't you?" He thought about it. "I guess I would." "Then you understand," she said softly. Silence helps no one. He nodded and walked over to sit beside her. "What if they don't listen?" he asked. "Then we make them listen," she said. "But we do it right, with truth and patience." For a moment, they sat in silence. It wasn't the awkward kind this time. It was a quiet understanding between them. Days passed. Jaden went back to school, but things felt different. Some teachers looked at him with sympathy, others with discomfort. His friends tried to act normal, but he could feel the shift. Every time he passed a police car, his heart jumped. It wasn't fear exactly. It was awareness, like his body refused to relax. One afternoon, as he walked home from school again, he noticed a car following him slowly from behind. For a second, panic shot through him. But when the window rolled down, he saw his mother behind the wheel. She smiled gently. "Hop in," she said. He exhaled with relief and got in. "You following me now?" he asked, half joking. "Just making sure you're okay," she replied. Old habits. They drove in silence for a while. The radio played softly, but neither of them really listened. Finally, she spoke. "You know, I joined the Bureau because I wanted to protect people. But sometimes it feels like protecting people means standing up to the same system you work for." Jaden looked at her. "That's not easy," she smiled faintly. "Nothing worth doing ever is." That night, while Jaden was doing homework, his mother received an unexpected call. The number belonged to a local reporter. She stepped into the hallway to answer. "Agent Carter, I wanted to confirm something. Are you the mother of the teen involved in the police stop last week?" "Yes," she said carefully. "Why do you ask?" "We're doing a story on racial profiling in the suburbs. I think your perspective would mean a lot." She hesitated. Going public wasn't her first choice. It could stir up attention she didn't want. But then she remembered Jaden's face that night, the fear he'd tried to hide. She took a breath. "All right," she said. "I'll talk." The interview aired 2 days later. It wasn't sensational or dramatic, it was honest. She spoke about what happened, about bias and about the need for change. She didn't use anger. She used facts and humanity. and people listened. The clip went viral not because of outrage, but because of the quiet power in her words. Jaden watched the segment sitting beside her. When it ended, he turned to her. "You were amazing," he said. She smiled. "I just told the truth." After that, everything started moving faster. The department issued a public statement promising to revise its training programs. The officers involved were temporarily suspended pending review. It wasn't everything, but it was something. At school, some teachers praised Jaden's mother for her courage. His classmates asked him questions, but he mostly stayed quiet. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just glad people were finally paying attention. One evening, they sat on the porch together watching the sunset. "You know," his mother said, "when I got that call that day, I've never been so scared in my life. All I could think about was getting to you." Jaden looked down. "I thought about you too. I didn't even know what to do." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did everything right, and you reminded me why I do what I do." He smiled faintly. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, looking at the sky, "we keep pushing forward. Change takes time, but it starts with stories like ours." Jaden nodded slowly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. His mother wasn't just strong. She was unstoppable, and maybe in his own way he could be too. The street was filled with flashing red and blue lights when her black SUV turned the corner. Tires screeched as she stopped at the edge of the crowd. People were recording on their phones, murmuring to each other about what was happening. The officer stood near a young boy pressed against a police car, his hands trembling on the hood. Her heart almost stopped when she realized it was her son. For a second, everything around her went silent. She stepped out, her heels hitting the ground with a sharp sound that made a few heads turn. She didn't rush or shout. She didn't have to. The confidence in her eyes said more than words could. With one steady motion, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her badge. The gold letters gleamed under the flashing lights. "Step away from him," she said, her voice calm but cold enough to cut through the noise. One of the officers turned, confused. "Ma'am, please stay back," he said, lifting his hand as if she were another concerned bystander. But then he saw the badge and his expression changed. His voice caught for a second. "Ma'am, Agent Carter?" The officer standing behind her son took a step back. His partner dropped his hand from the holster on his belt. The crowd went quiet, sensing something had shifted. She moved closer, her eyes never leaving her son. He looked up, his eyes red and wide. She gave him the smallest nod, a silent message that she was there now, that he was safe. "What's going on here?" she asked, her tone still level. "Why is my son being held?" The officer in charge started to explain, but his words stumbled out in fragments. Something about a stolen car, a vague description, a misunderstanding. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded in front of her. When he finally stopped speaking, she said, "So you pulled a gun on a teenager walking home from practice because he fit a description? Did you even confirm where he was coming from?" No one answered. The silence that followed was heavy. The younger officer shifted on his feet, looking anywhere but at her. She turned toward her son and said softly, "You can put your hands down, sweetheart." He slowly lowered them, rubbing his wrists where they had been held tight. She could see the faint red marks on his skin and her chest tightened. The officer tried to speak again. "Agent Carter, we were only doing our job." She cut him off with a raised hand. "Your job is to protect citizens, not terrify them. My son is 17. He's an athlete, a student, and you treated him like a criminal because you couldn't see past his skin color. That's not your job. That's your bias." Her voice never rose, but each word landed hard. A few of the bystanders whispered to one another. The officer swallowed, realizing how bad this looked. He opened his mouth to apologize, but she spoke again before he could. "You're lucky I got here when I did. You have no idea how fast this could have gone wrong." The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. The other officers stood still, their faces pale. She turned toward her son again, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded weakly. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Yeah, Mom." Her heart broke a little at the sound. She wanted to hug him, but she knew the crowd was still watching, recording. This wasn't just about comfort now. It was about accountability. She turned back to the officers. "You'll all need to write a full report on this incident. I'll be requesting copies, and I'll also be contacting your department's internal affairs first thing in the morning. One of the officers nodded quickly, mumbling something about procedure. Another simply looked at the ground. The flashing lights reflected off her badge as she slipped it back into her coat. "You can release him now," she said. "We're done here." The officer who had handcuffed her son hurried to unlock them. The click of the metal releasing was louder than it needed to be. When the cuffs came off, her son rubbed his wrists again, his breath shaky. She gave him another nod and guided him toward the SUV. As they walked away, the people around them started murmuring louder, some clapping softly, others whispering words of support. A few even called out to her, thanking her for standing up. She didn't respond. Her only focus was getting her son into the car and away from the lights. Once inside, he sank into the passenger seat silent. She got in, shut the door, and the noise outside disappeared. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was his uneven breathing. She reached out, resting her hand on his arm. "You did good," she said quietly. "You stayed calm." He looked at her, tears welling in his eyes. "I thought they were going to—" He couldn't finish. She squeezed his arm gently. "I know," she said. "I know." She started the engine, but before driving off, she took a deep breath and looked at him again. "You remember what I've always told you, right? About staying still, not arguing, keeping your hands where they can see them?" He nodded. "Yeah, I did everything you said." "I know you did," she said softly, "and that's why you're here right now." Her voice trembled slightly, just enough for him to notice. But it shouldn't have to be like that. They sat there for a long moment, the weight of what happened settling between them. Outside, the officers were still talking quietly among themselves, probably realizing how much trouble they were in. One of them kept glancing toward the SUV, guilt written all over his face. She finally drove away, her hands tight on the wheel. The road ahead was dark, lined with quiet houses and flickering streetlights. He leaned his head against the window, still shaken. "Mom," he said softly, "were they going to shoot me?" The question hit her harder than anything else that night. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to answer calmly. "I don't know, baby," she said honestly, "but I wasn't going to let them." He turned his face away, trying to hide his tears. She pretended not to notice, focusing on the road. Every light they passed seemed to flicker longer than usual. She kept glancing at him, making sure he was still okay, still breathing steadily. Her mind replayed every second of what she had seen. The way the officers' hands hovered over their guns, the fear in her son's eyes, the trembling in his voice. When they reached home, she parked the car and turned off the engine. For a long while, neither of them moved. Then she finally said, "Come inside. We'll talk." He followed her in, still quiet, still processing everything. Once inside, she closed the door behind them and leaned against it, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He dropped his bag on the couch and sat down. The house felt too calm compared to the chaos they had just left. She looked at him, her eyes soft but full of pain. "You didn't deserve that," she said. "No one does." He stared at his hands. "It doesn't matter who you are, huh?" he said quietly. "Even if your mom's with the FBI." Her eyes glistened. "That's exactly the problem," she said. "And that's why I do what I do." She walked over and sat beside him. "I've seen too many people go through things like this, but it's different when it's your own child. You never think it'll hit this close?" He nodded slowly. "I just don't get it," he said. "I wasn't doing anything wrong." "I know," she said. "You don't have to prove your innocence to me." She reached out and pulled him into a hug. For a few seconds he resisted, then finally gave in, resting his head against her shoulder. She held him tightly, her eyes closed, her mind racing with everything that could have happened but didn't. Outside, the street was quiet again. The flashing lights were gone. The crowd had dispersed, but for her the moment was far from over. It had left a mark, one that wouldn't fade easily. She knew there would be calls to make, reports to file, meetings to attend, but right now none of that mattered. What mattered was that her son was safe in her arms. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "You stayed strong." He didn't answer, just nodded against her shoulder. His body finally relaxed, the tension melting away little by little. She stroked his hair gently, the way she used to when he was little. "It's over," she said softly. "You're home now." But deep down she knew it wasn't really over. Not yet. The next morning began quietly. Sunlight poured through the blinds, warming the living room floor where her son sat, still deep in thought. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, the sound of the officer shouting replayed in his head, followed by the cold touch of metal on his wrists. It was supposed to be a normal day, but now it was a memory that wouldn't leave easily. His mother walked in, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and sat beside him. The look in her eyes said she hadn't slept either. She had spent most of the night writing down every detail of what had happened, determined not to let it disappear into silence. She was calm, but there was a quiet fire behind her expression. He could tell she was already thinking about her next step. "You don't have to talk about it yet," she said gently, "but I need you to know that what happened wasn't your fault." He stared at the mug, watching the steam rise. "I know," he said softly. "It's just—" It felt like I didn't matter, like they didn't even see me. She took a slow breath. "I know that feeling. I've seen it happen too many times. But this time we're not letting it go." He nodded, but his eyes were still distant. She watched him for a moment before speaking again. "I called the department's internal affairs last night," she said. "They're opening an investigation, and the police chief will have to answer some questions. There were too many witnesses for them to bury this." He looked up, surprised. "You're really going after them?" "I have to," she said. "Not just for you. For every kid who walks home and has to be scared of the people who are supposed to protect them." He didn't respond, but she could see a small spark in his eyes. Part relief, part pride. He had always admired her strength, but now he was seeing it in a different light. She wasn't just an agent. She was a mother who would go to war for him. Later that day, the story began to spread. Someone from the crowd had uploaded a video of the incident. Within hours, it had thousands of views. People online were outraged, demanding accountability. News vans appeared outside the local police station, and reporters started asking questions the officers didn't know how to answer. It was all over social media. Hashtags, interviews, comment threads filled with anger and support. When the video reached the FBI office, her colleagues were stunned. Some called to check on her. Others sent messages of solidarity. A few told her quietly that what she did was brave. She didn't see it that way. To her, it was just what any parent would have done. That afternoon, she met with the police chief. He was polite, even overly so, his tone heavy with regret. He apologized repeatedly, promising a full review. But she could tell his words were more about damage control than true remorse. "I appreciate your apology," she said evenly. "But I'm not interested in promises. I'm interested in change. I don't want another mother getting that phone call." The chief nodded, clearly uncomfortable. "We'll do better," he said, though she wasn't sure he understood what that really meant. Meanwhile, her son stayed home, trying to make sense of the attention. His phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from friends, classmates, even strangers who saw the video. Some were supportive, others asked intrusive questions. He turned the phone face down after a while. He didn't want to be known as a victim. He just wanted to feel normal again. When his mother came home that evening, he looked up from the couch. "Did anything happen?" he asked. "Enough to start something," she said. "The officers have been placed on leave while the investigation goes on. It's a small step, but it's something." He nodded. "It still doesn't change what they did." "No," she said softly. "It doesn't, but maybe it'll make them think twice next time." The house fell quiet again. She sat beside him, leaning back against the couch. "You know," she said after a while, "I've spent years working cases about injustice. I've read reports, seen footage, met families who've lost everything because of a mistake or bias. I thought I understood how they felt. But last night," she paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Last night I felt it in a way I never wanted to." He looked at her, unsure how to respond. She smiled faintly, trying to lighten the mood. "You scared me half to death, you know that?" He managed a small laugh. "Guess we both scared each other." That night they sat together watching the news. Their story had become a topic of national discussion. Commentators debated it on talk shows. Community leaders spoke out. It was strange seeing something so personal turn into a public issue, but deep down he knew maybe it needed to happen. The next day there was a knock on the door. When they opened it, a few neighbors stood outside. One of them, an older woman from down the street, brought over a small basket of food. "We saw what happened," she said. "We're just glad he's okay." Others offered quiet words of support. It wasn't much, but it meant something. It reminded them they weren't alone. As days passed, more information came out. The officers involved had a history of similar complaints, though most had been brushed aside. This time, with the video evidence and her involvement, things were different. Internal affairs moved quickly, and soon the department faced intense public pressure. One evening, her son asked, "Do you think they'll actually get punished?" She sighed. "I don't know. The system protects its own, but I'll make sure they don't forget this. Sometimes accountability starts with one person refusing to stay quiet." He thought about that for a moment and then said, "Maybe I could talk about it too, like at school. People need to know what it's really like." She looked at him proudly. "That's brave," she said. "If you're ready for it, I'll support you all the way." So a few weeks later, he did. He stood in front of his classmates and told them what happened, not with anger, but with honesty. He talked about fear, misunderstanding, and how fast things can spiral when people judge before they listen. His story spread further, inspiring others to speak up too. His mother sat in the back of the auditorium, tears in her eyes as she listened. It wasn't easy hearing him relive that night, but she knew it mattered. Months later, when the investigation concluded, the officers were disciplined, and new training programs were announced in the department. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a start. Change, she had learned, often comes slowly, but it starts with someone standing up. One evening, she and her son went for a drive. The same route he had walked that night. The street looked different now, peaceful again, but it carried a memory neither of them could forget. They stopped at the corner where the police car had pulled up. For a moment, they just sat there watching the sunset. He turned to her and said, "You think things will ever really change?" She looked out the window, the orange light reflecting in her eyes. "I think they already are," she said. "Because people are talking and people are watching. That's how it starts." He nodded slowly, taking in her words. "You think I'll ever stop being scared when I see police lights?" She hesitated, then spoke honestly. "Maybe not right away, but one day I hope you won't have to be." They sat quietly for a while. The world outside was calm, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt like healing, like a wound that wasn't gone but was beginning to close. When they got home, she opened her laptop and started typing a report for her department, a proposal for better community training and youth outreach. She had seen firsthand what fear could do, and she wanted to make sure fewer families ever had to feel it. Her son walked past, pausing by the doorway. "You're still working?" he asked. She smiled. "Always," she said. "But this time it's not just for my job. It's for us." He nodded and went to his room, feeling lighter than before. As she typed, she thought about that night, the flashing lights, the fear, the moment she saw her son standing there. It was an image she'd never forget, but it was also the reason she'd keep going. Before closing her laptop, she looked at the last line of her report and whispered softly to herself, "No more silence." Then she hit save. Outside, the city was quiet. The same streets that had once held fear now carried something different: hope. And though the memory of that night would never fade completely, it had become something else, a reminder that change often begins in the moments that scare us most.